right, we are recording. Tom Smith of Okta, take it away.
Thanks, Judith. Are you seeing my screen now, or do I still need to share?
I think you still need to share. Give it one more try.
Okay. Yep, sure.
Great. There should be a button at the bottom, and then you get to select the window. There it is. Awesome. Perfect.
If I can just get this in presentation mode. And how does that look?
Good. Really good.
Awesome. So thanks, Judith. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for attending today. My name is Tom Smith. I am a Partner Solutions Architect at Okta. I'm also joined by Eric Sauter, who's on the business development team with me at Okta. So we're here today to talk about how to secure your APIs using Kong and Okta. I'm actually going to be touching on two main use cases between Okta and Kong, and I'll go into these in a little bit more detail, but there's a little bit of a difference between securing APIs and securing applications. I'll touch on both of those use cases. I'll go into a little bit more depth and actually do a demo on the securing your APIs scenario, but I just want to make sure that everybody's aware that there's kind of two different use cases that are available here between the two solutions. So in terms of an agenda, you already know who I am. So to start with, I'll give a brief overview of the problem and the solution. I'll then give a brief overview of Okta. I realize that some of you may not be familiar with Okta, some of you may be, of course. And then I will actually go into an example solution. So I have a live demo that I'll go through that shows how Kong and Okta complement each other. And then I'll go into Kong, or actually go into some of the documentation of Kong and show how I set that up on the Kong side. And then I'll actually go into Okta and show how I set it up on the Okta side. And then hopefully we'll have some time for some questions at the end. So the problem and opportunity. So, I mean, the big opportunity for us is that APIs and applications are proliferating, especially as we're getting into things like microservices, which, Kong is, of course, great at managing. So, as these APIs and applications proliferate, the question becomes, how do we manage all of these? How do we manage access to them? And how can we manage access so that it's both secure and easy to use? Because we don't want to slow down the rate of innovation. There's a lot of great stuff going on. Everything's getting connected. We don't want to slow that down, but we want to make sure that it's secure. So hopefully you can all identify with that at some level. In terms of Okta, we were founded in 2009. We really pioneered the identity management space in the cloud. And we've been growing very quickly since we were founded. Recently, or I guess maybe not so recently, we went public in April of 2017. We have more than 4,000 customers around the world, and these customers range from small mom and pop shops to big enterprises like MGM Hotels, Athena Health, Time Warner. But it's in almost every vertical. So every vertical, every geography. So we're pretty dispersed. We have more than 3 million users who use our service every day, from employees to partners to customer end users. And we have more than 5,000 pre-built integrations. And those integrations are built on industry standards like SAML, OAuth, OIDC, and SCIM. And finally, we are, for 4 years running, the leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant in identity management. So very proud of that. We have 4 core services in the Okta Identity Cloud. So you can see we have single sign-on. That's kind of where we started, especially in the enterprise space. And single sign-on, as its name applies, gives your users, whether they're employees or external users, single sign-on access to applications. So typical use cases for employees who are getting single sign-on access to whatever, the 20 or 50 applications that they need access to. Universal Directory is our user store. We call it Universal Directory because those users can come from almost anywhere. So they can, of course, be native Okta users, so you can master users in Okta, but those users can also come in from an HR system or an external directory like Active Directory, Salesforce, again, your HR systems, or an LDAP directory. And we can take users from all of those different sources, put them under one roof, so to speak, and give you one view so that you can manage all of those users in one space. Lifecycle management is about how those users get created, and perhaps more importantly, how those users get deactivated and eventually just plain deleted. So we consider ourselves a security company, and one of the big problems that we solve is when an employee leaves a company or changes into a new role, how do you make sure that they don't have access to anything that they shouldn't have access to? And that goes for end users as well, consumers as well. So when a user gets deactivated in Okta, we can deprovision them from all of the applications that they've been assigned to. Adaptive MFA is where we really kind of enhance the security of your environment. We have our own MFA solution, Okta Verify with Push, but we are really Switzerland when it comes to MFA solutions. So you can bring almost any MFA solution that you want to the table, and we can incorporate it into our sign-on policy. So whether it's Google Authenticator or even RSA, SMS, email, all different kinds of ways that you can use MFA with Okta. And again, we have very sophisticated policies to control, so you can implement when those are presented to the user. And then finally, API access management. This is our most recent product. We've had it up and running for about 1.5 years now. We've gotten very good uptake on it, and that's what I'll be talking about mostly today. And what that does is we are an OAuth 2 certified provider. So we can help you secure your APIs by minting access tokens that are tied to a user's rights. So these services really make up two product lines at Okta. There's the IT products, and this is really kind of where we started, providing that identity and access management to employees. And that's continued to grow as enterprises are kind of, going all in on digital. And then there's our API products service, which is really our more consumer developer focused products. And that's what I'll be talking about today. And that is really about transforming the customer experience. Finally, we're a security company, so we're about modernizing IT for the enterprise, but also transforming the customer experience. And these are some of the brands. This is just a selection of some of the brands and companies that we work with today. Now, in terms of API management, I just want to make one quick clarification kind of from the start here, is that Okta does not do API management. We're not an API gateway. We're not in the API management space. And I have there on the slide some of call them the pillars of API management. So you'll see familiar terms there like lifecycle, interface, consumption, and business. Those are all about managing the lifecycle of your API, doing things like load balancing. Okta's not in that space at all. Where we are in API management is in the access space. So what we do, the particular skills and services that we bring to the table are the ability to ensure that only the users who should be getting access to your API or application are getting access to that API. So I just kind of want to clarify where we fit in that API space. Okay, so let's start getting into some tech stuff. I'll go over what the user architecture looks like in Okta first. So this is this scenario is one that I've set up. It's very simple, but it's basically about two different kinds of users getting two different access tokens based on their group membership in Okta. So I'll talk about what that looks like from an architecture perspective, and then when I go into Okta itself, I'll show you how this is actually set up in Okta. But you've got in Okta Universal Directory, you've got users and groups. You have many other things in Universal Directory as well, but for the sake of this demo, we're just going to talk about users and groups in Universal Directory. So I have two sample users, Carl Sagan and Jody Foster. Those two users belong to two different groups. So Carl Sagan is in the Solar System Silver group, and Jody Foster is in the Solar System Gold group. And basically what that gives them at the end of the day is different levels of access to our Solar System API. So that's just an API that I made up. It's being protected by Kong, of course. But that's the example that we're using today. So the idea is that these users are in groups, and using Okta policies in an Okta authorization server, you can map those group memberships to rights, authorizations, and an access token. So I've set up a policy in Okta that says if a user is a member of the silver group, then they're going to get this scope, the silver scope. If they're a member of the gold group, then they're going to get this scope. And when I say scope, that's a scope that's embedded in the access token after the user authenticates. I can assign this policy to just certain clients in Okta, or I can assign it to all clients. I have this mapped to all clients, but I think in the actual demonstration, I've mapped it to just a specific client. And I'll show you what that looks like in Okta. There's also claims. You can do custom claims, so you can control what claims about a user appear in an ID token or an access token. And I just want to kind of emphasize again here that in terms of this universal directory, these users can be native Okta users for external use cases, consumers and developers. They're most often just native Okta users who are authenticating directly against Okta. But those users can also be users who are authenticating against Active Directory, or they can be federated from some other external identity provider and coming in via SAML or OIDC as well. And again, just kind of another sneak preview of what I'll be showing you. This is all done via the GUI in Okta. It can all be done via API as well in Okta, but it's very simple to do through the GUI in Okta. Okay, so I'll just pause there. So again, what I'm going to show you is API access management, but there's another use case here where we can talk about authentication. And I'll just give you a quick overview of what that looks like. Yeah, so this is a diagram here. And what that looks like, I'm just going to blow that up a little bit. So this is on a blog post that a colleague of mine put together. I can send that out afterwards. I'm sure, Judith, if I send that to you, you can get it out to the group. But this is really about that authentication use case. And the authentication use case is quite simply basically having Kong here in the middle, and then having your end users authenticate against Okta. And what that allows is all of these downstream services here that are being secured by Kong. None of these services need to worry about OIDC or authentication at all. That's happening through Kong and Okta. So that handshake is happening between Kong and Okta. And then any user info that you want to pass to those downstream applications, you can do that. So the user info is coming from Okta in an ID token usually, and then Kong can parse that and then pass it down to those downstream applications so that those downstream applications don't need to worry about user authentication. API access management is a little bit different. And again, that's what I'll be going into a little bit more depth today. So the way that flow works is that in this case, unlike the one that I just showed you, in this case, the application is sitting outside of Kong. So again, in that previous example, Kong was in front of the application. In this case, the application is outside of Kong. The user is going to authenticate against Okta. Okta is going to apply all of the access policies, MFA, make sure the username and password is correct, of course. And if all of that checks out, in this case, I'm showing the authorization code grant flow, Okta is going to issue an authorization code. Don't need to go into too much detail on the authorization code grant flow, but at the end of the day, what they're going to get is an access token from Okta. And that access token from Okta is going to include any appropriate scopes for that end user. And again, those scopes, the scopes that are included are going to be determined by group memberships and other policies that you've set up in Okta. So now that the access token, now that the application has that access token, it can pass it in and it wants to request information from or data from the API. It passes that access token into Kong. Kong evaluates the access token, decides whether the access token is still valid, also looks at whether the scopes in the access token are appropriate for the endpoint that's being requested, and if so, sends that payload back down to the application, which then can present it to the end user. And this is just kind of a macro view of what that process looks like in Kong. So here's my application. I'm looking for a specific endpoint in an API, or I'm querying a specific endpoint in an API. I'm passing in that access token. Kong is going to look at that access token, validate it against Okta's keys, and also look at the scopes to see whether they're appropriate for the access point that's being requested. So that's the general pattern of API access management between Okta and Kong. All right, now let's get into a demo. See if I can blow this up a little bit. Okay, so as I've been alluding to, in this example, I've got two end users. I've got Carl Sagan and I've got Jody Foster. And I've got two endpoints. So there's a planets endpoint, and this is the URL that I'm hitting. And this is a box obviously out on AWS that's running Kong. And I've got two endpoints defined for this API. I've got planets and I've got moons. So right now I'm in a totally unauthenticated state. So if I say, show me the planets, I'm going to reload the page. I'm going to show me the planets, and I'm going to get unauthorized. Same with the moons. But now if I get into an authenticated state, so I'm going to authenticate as Carl Sagan. Okay, now I get an access token. And just, this is just for demo purposes. Ordinarily, you would not show an access token in the browser like this. It would be kept on the application side, but I'm just showing it for demo purposes. So the important thing here is that I've got the scope, and this has been issued by Okta, that I need to get access to that planet's endpoint. Okay, so now if I try to get the planets, I get a list of the planets. However, excuse me, for the moons endpoint, I need gold. And if I try to get to the moons, I still get forbidden. So now if I log out as Carl, I'm going to authenticate as Jody. So Jody has, as far as scopes in her access token, a silver scope and that gold scope. So she can see the moons and the planets. So that's, again, very simplistic, but that's the basic idea behind API access management. So I'm going to hop out of the demo now and go into what that looks like in Okta. Actually, I'm going to show you first what it looks like in Kong when I do that. So I've got this documented out on GitHub, and this is publicly available. Anybody can look at this and download it. You can set up something very similar to what I've set up here using the instructions that I have here online. But I'll show you what the key bits in Kong are. So in Kong, and I did this all via the command line, these are the commands that I used. So first, I just created a service. I added a resource to the service. I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with how this works. And then I added the OIDC plugin to that planets root. Okay, so I first created the planets root, and then I added the OIDC plugin to the planets root. Now, when I added the OIDC plugin, I've got the root ID there, and this is all documented on Kong's website. Well, the key part here is that I've added Okta as the issuer. And I've also have a client ID. Okay, so those are two of the key values. And I'll show you where you can get those in the Okta tenant when I jump back over to Okta. And then in my API, I just added another route to the API, the moons route. And I should point out, yes, this is the key bit here, is that when I define the route, I'm sorry, when I define the OpenID Connect plugin, I said that the scope required is that gold scope. Okay, so that's where that enforcement comes in for needing a specific scope for a specific endpoint. And I did that in the planets definition as well. So that was very straightforward in Kong, very, very easy to do. So let's see what it looks like in Okta now. So this is my Okta tenants, and just for those of you, again, who are not familiar with Okta, you can go online right now, go to developer.okta.com, and you can sign up for a free tenant, which has virtually no limits on it in terms of either time or applications or users. There's some, but you won't run into any as you're doing this kind of stuff. So this is my authorization server that I've set up. You can set up as many authorization servers in an Okta tenant as you want. You can see in this authorization server, I've set up these are my scopes that I've set up. Okay, so I created those custom scopes in my Okta tenants. And then in my access policies, I have the solar system access policy. And in this case, I've assigned it just to the solar system OIDC application. And then I have two rules in the policy, one for silver access and one for gold access. So if I go to the silver access, you can see that obviously it's connected to the silver subscribers group. And I'm saying that issue this scope when the user authenticates from this group. So again, this is all done through the admin UI. You can do it through the API, Okta API as well. But all of this stuff is very, very configurable in terms of policy. You can base it on groups. You can base it on network location, a real variety of things in terms of controlling how users get access tokens. And then the one for gold access is very, very similar. I'm just adding two scopes to that if the user is a member of that. So let's look at what that looks like in terms of this is Universal Directory. So if I go to people here, I can see there's Jodie Foster. She was in the gold group. So this is what her profile looks like. And I can see that her group membership, she's in that gold subscribers group and the silver subscribers group. Why don't I create a new person just for fun and see what happens. So first I'll search. Oh, I have Stephen King. I was going to search for King Kong, but I'll search for Kong. All right, so I don't have a user named Kong yet, so I'm going to add a person. It's going to be King Kong. And I'm going to add King Kong to the gold subscribers group. Okay, so now let's just see what that looks like. Make sure it looks okay. There's King Kong. It's in that gold subscribers group. So let's go back to our demo. All right, sweet. So that was a new user that we just created, King Kong, and you can see that he got the silver scope and the gold scope because he's a member of that silver group, and so he can see the moons. Okay, so that is a very quick high-level overview of how Okta and Kong work together. Again, more focused on the API access management piece. But Judith, I'll send you the relevant links afterwards. And at this point, I am happy to take any questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tom. So you all got auto muted when you joined the call, but you are welcome to unmute yourselves and ask as many questions as you want. So, and if you want and you're more comfortable, you can ask in chat also. So I did have a question, Tom, which is that
Great.
it sounded like you define somebody's scope in Okta, and then when Kong checks with Okta, when that user authenticates, Kong also checks on the scope in addition to the user authenticating. And I was wondering why, like, is that redundant and why is it designed like that?
So it's not redundant in the sense that there's kind of two levels of, I guess, the difference between authentication and authorization. So if you just get a valid token, specifically a valid ID token from Okta, and Kong gets that, they know that King Kong has validated successfully against Okta. But if you want to control what API endpoints a specific user or a specific group of users has access to, then you want to make sure that in that token, you have specific scope. So not only who the user is, but what rights they have to the API endpoints. So kind of a more classic example is if this user is a member of the admin group, then they might have write access to certain API endpoints rather than having just read access to certain API endpoints.
So when you recheck that scope, it's basically like making sure that nothing has changed in Okta about that user's permissions.
That's right. Yep.
I see. Cool. What other questions do we have for Tom? Cool. Okay, thank you very much, Tom. That was really informative, and send me those links and I will add them to the agenda doc so that people can try it out.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. I'm gonna see if I can.
Try to stop sharing my screen here.
Yeah, I'm gonna kick you off.
Okay.
There we go. Cool. So the next thing that we have is Cooper Marcus is going to tell us about contributing to the Kong documentation. And the reason for this is that it's Hacktoberfest right now. So Hacktoberfest is in October, DigitalOcean very generously offers to give out t-shirts for people who open 5 PRs in the month of October. And these PRs can be to any open source project. So of course, Kong and its documentation are both open source, and contributing to the docs is a really great way to get started contributing to open source and also to start understanding Kong a little bit better. So we figured that every open source repo basically has its own interesting little quirks about how we prefer to get PRs and how we prefer to do things. And so what's going to happen is Cooper's going to just introduce how to contribute to the docs. And then I would love to hear from you guys where you've run into trouble in the past or any confusing things about contributing, because we're always looking to have fresh eyes on the process and make sure that it's as smooth as possible for the things that we need to guarantee get done. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Cooper. Cooper,
Great.
Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Judith. I'll just call out Tom. There's an Okta question in the chat.
Oh, great.
So potentially you can hop in there. And let's see, I will share my screen.
Yeah, I got to stop sharing.
And here we go.
Cool.
All right, sharing, and let me close that down a little bit. Okay, so hi, I'm Cooper. I'm the Director of Ecosystem here at Kong. And one of the things I do around here is help with our documentation site. Docs are important. They're how you get introduced to things, how you learn to use them, how you have a helping hand as you grow in your expertise. And notably for Oktoberfest, there also can be Hacktoberfest. They can be a great, easy way to get started with contributing to an open source project. Now, our docs are open source on GitHub, and I'm going to go through a demo here of getting started with the docs, the contributing process, and I'm starting from the very beginning. So let's say I've been browsing the docs and I'm interested in making a contribution. Well, While you can make a PR on the doc site by directly editing in a fork and not running the doc site locally, we're appreciative if you do run the doc site locally as part of your contribution process, because it lets you preview your contributions. So I'm going to go through the process of actually getting the doc site and running it locally. So first I'm going to clone a repository here in my GitHub desktop. And hopefully this is all going to be quick enough that.
So Cooper, step one is that people should fork the project, right?
Yes, right. So I can clone it here because I have the permissions. You could clone it, but then of course you can't make a PR back directly to it. So you would need to fork it and then have a local copy of your fork. But I'm cloning it directly. Thank you, Judith, keeping me on the straight and narrow. Now the doc site is, it follows the docs as code principle. It's a static site built with Jekyll and Liquid. Luckily, much of the sort of complexity of working with static site generator is, if not hidden from you, at least you don't really have to understand it to make contributions, particularly those that are related purely to the content of the site, because we've got these nice commands here on the README for installing and running it. Now, I already have the prerequisites here, NPM, Bundler, Ruby, and Python. Installing those, if you don't have them or you have different versions, can be a little involved. So we've been making some progress recently on a Docker-based local development environment. And you'll see here there's a develop locally with Docker and develop locally without Docker option. I'm demoing the without Docker option, but you could try the with Docker option, and we're working on a PR that should make this Docker option even better, and we'll hopefully be merging that in soon. Okay, so I now have the doc site local, and I'm on the master branch, and let's go ahead and switch to the terminal. And let's see if we can get it running. So first, gem install bundler. Gem install bundler. So this is going to run for a moment here. Now, this running locally, as I mentioned, is a nice to have when you're making contributions, because it lets you see them before you submit them. I'll now do an npm install. Someday, we'd like to have a way of you seeing your PR preview without having to run locally. We hope to add that someday soon. But until then, this approach seems to work well. So it's now installing some NPM packages that we'll need. This should hopefully go smoothly. And then we'll be about to start the site. Now, I want to show you what happens when you do start the site locally. Let me go into, actually, hold on, let me go into here. Come on. Come on. Oh. There we go. And let me view this repository in the Finder. What happens when you run the site locally is the Jekyll build process effectively renders the site to a dist folder from which it's served. This is a similar process to what happens when we actually deploy the site to production. The site is rendered into a bunch of HTML and CSS and JavaScript, which is put in the dist folder and then served up by GitHub pages. The build process is the same, whether you're running locally or whether me or a fellow Kong employee is deploying the master branch to production, which is part of why running this locally and getting a preview works so well, because what you see locally is what everybody will see if your PR gets merged and deployed. So let's see how we're doing here with our npm install. Looks like it's moving along. Shouldn't take too much longer. And very close. So just for a little preview of the documentation site folders here, all the fun stuff is here in the app folder. The documentation about Kong itself is either in these version folders. So Kong Community Edition 0.14 is documented here in the 0.14 folder. Kong Enterprise Edition is documented within the Enterprise folder. There's some version folders as well. And I'm most excited about a recent edition of the Kong Hub. And let's just look at these on the doc side of themselves just to line things up. Here is the Community Edition docs. I'll click on Enterprise Edition. Now I'm looking at the Enterprise Edition docs, and I'll click on the Hub. Now I'm looking at docs for Hub listings, which include, as of recently, third-party listings, and here is Okta's integration that we just saw demoed earlier in the call. All of these pages we've just looked at, Community, Enterprise, and the Hub, are all in the app folder here in different subfolders. We also have some assets in terms of some icons, some includes that get substituted in on pages where they're called for, some layouts that control how things look in general. And I will call out, there's a little bit of dead code in here. We've moved from the Hub, from our old plugins to the new Hub structure. And so there's, sorry, not that plugins folder, but a different one, this one. So there is some code in here that's marked as dead code. You'll see here, fix me, this is dead code. So be aware of those. We'll be cleaning those up soon. Okay, did we finish? We did. All right, last step for running it locally is npm start, S-T-A-R-T, I can spell. All right, so this is now going to run through the Jekyll build process. It also runs through the test process. Assuming all the tests pass, everything will get rendered into the dist folder. And let's see, there it is, it's appeared, and it's going to start getting populated. So you can see the build running over here on the left. This dist folder should, in a moment, start getting a bunch of new folders within it. And then a web server will start up and we'll be able to browse the site locally. Now, the doc site, as we mentioned, is all open source on GitHub. Contributions can be fun and easy, particularly when you're just working with the content itself. We had a great contribution, a very timely one from a community member overnight, finding and correcting, embarrassingly, what appears to be hundreds of spelling mistakes across the doc site. We greatly appreciate that. And in this demo, I'm going to actually go all the way through the process of reviewing that particular PR, merging it in, and deploying the doc site. Now, deploying the site is not something the community does. It's only accessible via GitHub's permissions to members of, to employees of Kong. So don't worry when you see the documentation here in the README deploying, this deploys to GitHub pages. You can't do that. So don't worry, you won't screw things up. I worried about that at first and then became reassured. All right, so you can see that the build process is continuing here. And let's see what we've got in the Finder. There, the dist folder is getting populated with all sorts of folders of content. And is any of that chat anything I need to see, Judith? I'm not watching it right now.
No.
Okay, great. All right, so look at that. We now see here that we've got URLs for browsing the site locally. So let's switch to the browser, localhost 3000, and ta-da, there's a doc site. Looks a lot like the one we were just looking at. In fact, it should be a precise copy because I'm running from master. And you can see I can browse different parts here. But this is all getting served locally. So if I made a change locally, what will happen, and let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to open up the site in my text editor.
Oh, do you want to switch branches?
Before I make a change?
Yes.
It's all right. It's going to be temporary. So.
I mean, if we want to show people how to contribute.
Oh, sure. So let's say I want to actually make a real contribution. not just messed about. I'm going to create a new branch. In your case, it would be a fork. And this is going to just be called Cooper Testing for now. Now, as soon as I made this new branch, nothing has changed. So there's no rebuild here in Jekyll. But as soon as I make a change and save it, and I'm going to be so bold as to make a change to, let's see, where should I do it? Let's go on Kong 0.14, getting started, quick start, start Kong. That's not where I want to do it.
Do we have any guidelines for branch naming for the doc site?
We do, and the guidelines are here in our GitHub repo. Within contributing, we'll find some information here about naming branches, what they should be called, having good atomicity. I'm sure I said that wrong, on your commits, and putting in good commit messages to help us stay organized and have things be clear. Hopefully this information is clear enough. We appreciate you attempting to follow it. If you don't get it quite right, don't worry about it. We'll tune things up as we merge them in. And if you think you can make our contributing guidelines more clear, we welcome contributions to the contributions. So feel free to make a PR to improve this particular document. So let's go in here, and I'm going to make a change to one of the hub files. Go into Kong's and the ACL one, and I'll leave some quick graffiti here. Cooper says hi. All right. I should know how to spell my own name. So I'm going to save that. We see here in GitHub Desktop that there's been a save. Oh, also my text editor is stripped off an extraneous end of line space. And we'll see here that our local environment has restarted the Jekyll build process. It noticed that there was a change in one of the local docs site files, and it's now rebuilding the doc site so that we can see our changes. So let's see, what am I on? The ACL plugin. So here I am on my local version. I'll go into the ACL plugin, and right, I'm not seeing my change yet because the doc site is still rebuilding its content. But in a moment, what should happen is this page will get automatically refreshed. It's a handy little helper in our local development environment that will force the refresh of local doc site pages so that your local changes, there we go, it just refreshed, get reflected without you even having to go to the trouble of refreshing. And look, there it is. Cooper says hi. Now, this is a terrible addition to the website. So in this case, I'm going to delete this change. There we go. Discard those changes. So, just to clean up, I don't need this branch. So I'm going to delete this branch as local. All right. So what I did, just to review, I came to the doc site. I visited the README. I used the documented process here. I had previously installed the prerequisites. I ran gem install bundler, npm install, and npm start. And what I got from that was a local version of the doc site where I can preview the changes as I make them prior to submitting a PR. That concludes that portion of the demo. And now let's switch gears a little bit. And we're going to have a look at this helpful PR. Now I'm going to switch to the PR branch here and fetch that origin. And we're also going to have a look at it in here. So a community member and Bravo, a first-time contributor, look at that, updated 168 different files with various spelling improvements. Thank you, much appreciated. these look good. And so I'm going to give it a shot by running it locally. Now, because I was already running the doc site locally and I switched branches, the Jekyll build process just kicks off automatically. It notices that there's been changes, a lot of changes, 168 changed files in my local doc site. And so it's rebuilding the local version. And in a moment, this should refresh. Now, for the purposes of this demo, I went ahead and reviewed this ahead of time. 168 changes is a lot to review live, so I'm not going to bore you with that, but they looked good. I'm running the site locally, though, just to make sure that it actually runs, right? It passes tests, it builds correctly, and I do a quick smoke test. Can I navigate to some pages? Yep, looks good. Do I see anything weird? Nope, all looks just as normal as it used to. So I'm going to go over to this PR, switch to the conversation. I'm going to say, big thanks to you, HUGOVK. Appreciated, go Hacktoberfest. And pumpkin, is that the Jekyll? There we go.
Yeah,
all right. Comment on that. Now, because I have the right permissions, I'm able to do a squash and merge here.
Before we do that, actually, can we talk a little bit about, because we do also have some guidelines for commit messages. And so I wanted to talk about how to do that for the GUI, because that was something that I found kind of confusing during my first contribution. So if you want to just scroll up to the top here. So all of those guidelines for commit messages, when you squash, will you scroll up, up, up? When you squash and merge, is correct spelling the commit message for this? Like, is that going to turn out to be the commit message when you squash this? Is the correct spelling?
So here we go. When I do a squash and merge, what's happening is all of the various commits, in this case, there were only 2, but in some PRs, there's many, many more. They all get squashed into a single commit with a single subject line and then a body where we can describe them. The body is a little bit less important. I think this is a well-formed body, but the subject line is more important, and we want to follow, or I attempt to follow, the naming conventions that we describe here in the contributing file. And as I mentioned earlier, we appreciate community members making an effort to match our naming conventions, and so we'll go in here, commit message format, type, parentheses, scope, space, subject, with a 50-character limit. And then here's some of the types, and here's some of the scopes. Now, in this case, the type is docs, because it's changed to the content. And the scope is star, changes many parts of the code base at once, because even though this said it's rare, it should be avoided. In this case, actually, it's great. We're updating spelling in a bunch of places all at once. So that's just fine. So I've added that docs parentheses star notation here to the beginning of the commit message.
Okay, and if you hadn't added that, it would have just been the commit message that they put in that subject line.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to confirm this squash and merge. This is going to merge into the master branch. Now I'm going to switch to my GitHub desktop, and I'm going to switch to the master branch. I'm going to fetch the origin. I'm going to pull it just to make sure. Okay, now I have locally the same master that exists on github.com. And so my last step is to deploy it. Now, as I mentioned before, don't worry about it. If you try to run the deploy code, you won't be able to, but I have the necessary permissions. npm run deploy. That's what I want. Now I'm already running the doc site locally, so I'm going to quit out of that. Oops, there we go. And I'm going to npm run deploy. This one I did not practice ahead of time, but I have no reason to believe that it won't work. So I believe it will work. Effectively, what this does is it runs the Jekyll build process again. It builds the site locally, and then it pushes to GitHub Pages that built site. And in GitHub Pages, it will end up on a special branch, which is this GitHub Pages branch. And this GH Pages, it's this special branch that serves up our doc site via GitHub Pages, web serving capability. We can see here on this particular GitHub Pages branch, deployments from master to production. So the last time the doc site was deployed was on October 12th, and I deployed it. That was 4 days ago. And what we should get when this process finishes is a new deployment here in the GitHub Pages branch, which indicates that all of the commits that were merged to master since October 12th are now going to be live on our production website. Now, as a community contributor, there can be a little bit of a delay between your PR getting made, first of all, reviewed, second of all, merged, third of all, and deployed, fourth of all. We try to have that review, merge, and deploy process be short, but it isn't always precisely short. So there may be a day or two or three of waiting in between. Now let's see, how's our build process going? Everything's looking good so far. We're not going to see the new commit here yet until this process is finished. Judith, any questions from the audience there, or?
No,
Okay.
Not yet in chat, but
Great.
if you, we actually only have 2 minutes left in the whole meeting. So if you have any questions, either for Tom or for Cooper, please feel free to either unmute yourself or chat them in now.
I'm always happy to hear questions from the community about contributing or issues with the docs site. We welcome issues to be opened right on the docs GitHub issues tracker. Pull requests, of course, also always welcome. And in the spirit of Hacktoberfest, we've labeled a number of issues here as good first issues. Some of them are more kind of Jekyll build oriented. Some of them are more content or code oriented. And just because they don't say good first issue doesn't mean they're not. They might be good for you because you have the skill and knowledge or the wherewithal to teach yourself how to fix them. So we're starting the GitHub Pages deployment here, and that should finish briefly. And then we'll see a new commit, and we'll have a new version of the site running. Whoops, I'm on the wrong branch. Let's switch to GitHub Pages. Thanks for bearing with me through this demo. I know we're going just a minute over time here. Oops, come on. There we go. Hopefully this will finish before we go too far over time. The docs as code process we have here is a not uncommon one in open source projects. And I'm pretty excited to have gotten involved with it here at Kong compared to how docs were created and maintained at other companies I've worked for. This is very democratic and accessible. And I think that's really terrific for an open source project to make things so easy to contribute to.
Sweet. So everyone, this is being recorded. So if you do have to drop, you can find the recording later for the end of the process. We do have a question from Jeremy. I'm not sure if anybody from the core team is online, but Jeremy, I can try and answer it also. We do not have a timeline for 1.0 GA, but all of the development for 1.0 is going on to the next branch. So if you are at Kong's GitHub page, you can follow along with the next branch to see kind of the velocity that code is going in, the type of code that's going in. I think you can check the latest Is there a nightly build? We do have nightly builds now, right?
I think so, yeah. Yeah.
I believe we have nightly builds now, so you can check on how things are going and help test along the way if you run into problems. But unfortunately, we don't have a date for when things are coming out. It's just whenever it's stable. We will be updating the 1.0.0 branch soon before GA, but I'm not sure when that's going to be. I hope that answers your question.
All right. The build.
Cool.
The build and deploy has finished. We see here, took about 5 minutes. I think that's because my computer's also working on serving up the Zoom screen sharing. And there we go, commits on October 16th. That's today, just a minute ago, and we got a deploy. And just to be sure, let's visit the docs site and make sure it appears to be running correctly. Now, we have noticed sometimes that when we deploy to GitHub pages, we see briefly some CSS issues on the doc site while GitHub updates its caches. Oh, this is a page that sometimes shows them, but not today. All right, demo gods are smiling on us. So that's it. Clone, install, and run the doc site. Make a contribution, PR it. Gets reviewed on my side, merged, and then we deploy to production. And we thank you profusely, community members, for helping us build a better Kong.
And one last thing to highlight, because being part of the Kong community isn't just about contributing code, we've now added to the docs contributions the ability to get a Kong contributor t-shirt. So if you get a PR merge to the doc site, we will try and message you about signing up for that t-shirt. But if we don't remember, there is a link to the form at the bottom of the contribute.md file. So please sign up for your t-shirt if you do contribute.
Show that contributing, and let's step down, scroll to the bottom, and look at that handsome t-shirt.
There it is. Yeah, Hernando's modeling it.
Sharp.
Cool. All right, so I think we are going to call it a day for this meeting. I'm going to stick around for a couple more minutes just in case anyone has any questions. But if you don't, thank you so much for joining us and have a great rest of your week. The next meeting will be in November. I forget the date, but I will update the agenda document with it when we've got it. And if you have any topic suggestions, please add those there too. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Judith. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
See you next time.